Here with me now to discuss, CNN senior political analyst Kirsten Powers and Republican strategist and CNN political commentator Alice Stewart. Good to have you both on this morning. Kirsten, if I could begin with you. I mean, this typically happens when folks read the tea leaves and they're like, not a good year for Democrats. That said, we did see a lot of Republicans retire pre-2020. They actually did better than many expected in the House. But, there are a lot of other signals here, including on the generic ballot. Is it a fait accompli? 2022 is disastrous for Democrats?
Well, as you know, Jim, historically speaking, the party that's in power in the White House typically does not do well in the midterm elections, in the first midterm election. And so the expectation would be, based on historic trends, that the Democrats wouldn't do well. So I think that we have to always keep that in mind when we're talking about this. So it's not always, a lot of people will try to make it, there's a razor thin majority as it is. So if the Democrats were to lose the majority, people would try to make it into some sort of referendum on the Democratic Party. And I think we have to keep the historical lens very clear that that would be the normal thing to happen for them to lose seats, right? So that's the typical thing. I do think, every member is retiring for a different reason, but a lot of times they are, when they retire, it is because some people feel like, I don't want to be in the minority, or they feel like it's become too toxic, or their district the lines are being redrawn. That's the situation for some of them. So, but the net of it is it's not great news for the Democratic Party because they have such a narrow majority.
Alice Stewart, do Republicans smell blood in the water here?
Well, clearly, and it's evidenced by the large numbers that we're seeing. And Kirsten's right, history is not positive for the party in power, but this is a real unprecedented jump from a sinking ship. And the reasons are quite simple. We see in the current Democratic Party, there is low morale and accomplishment to date. And there's also high anticipation and high anxiety about what redistricting will mean, and the thought of losing power. Many of these that are stepping down, as Kirsten said, for different reasons. Some are fear not being in power. They not only lose control in the House, but important seats. They lose their gavel in many of these committee assignments, and that's not a positive thing. And what has happened, what we're seeing is that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party has really taken hold and really got a lot of influence. And that has to be frustrating for a lot of the moderate Democrats. Joe Manchin on the Senate side is a case in point. But what they need to do is, I think, focus on the constituents they have back in their district and serving the constituents in their district, and not think about party-wide in Washington, D.C., and what's best for the people of the district, because those are the people that they are sworn to serve in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and we have seen, interestingly, some Democratic members, I don't know if revolt is too strong a word, but straying from the DCCC's kind of messaging for 2022. Okay, Alice brought up Joe Manchin, Kirsten Powers. You might have heard of him. I want to play a quick clip of him on whether if there is still a place for him in the Democratic Party, and get your thoughts. Have a listen.
Is there still a place for you in the Democratic Party?
Well, I think I would like to hope that there's still Democrats that feel like I do. I said I'm fiscally responsible and socially compassionate. Now, if there's no Democrats like that, then they have to push me wherever they want me.
He raised the possibility they're being pushed too, and there's a lot of flack being directed his way here. I mean, is there a place for him? Do you sense him flirting with, if not the Republican Party, then possible independence?
I could see him becoming an independent and caucusing with the Democrats, and I don't think that would be a horrible thing. I think that it would probably more accurately reflect who he is and what he believes. I don't think he's a Republican. He clearly supports a lot of things that Republicans don't support. So, but I do think that he clearly is different than a lot of other Democrats. I mean, we can see moderates in the House, for example, did support Build Back Better, right? So it's not just that he's a moderate. And I was kind of laughing, the idea, I love you, Alice, but the idea that, the person who's frustrated is Joe Manchin because progressives are in control. I mean, Joe Manchin is controlling everything, right? So it's like there's no situation where Joe Manchin isn't having influence. He's holding the party hostage to his beliefs. And And I do think we are at a point now, based on the reporting that's out there, if it's accurate, what he has proposed to President Biden, at this point, I think Democrats should just accept what he wants, because the things that he has put forward, again, we're going on reporting, would still be a really big deal. So the things that he does support in terms of universal pre-K, I mean, that's a big deal. And, money for climate change and those kinds of things. And so if that's real, I think it's better to get something rather than nothing.
Take the deal you can get. Alistair, please go ahead.
If I can just, sure, I share the sentiment. I love you, Kirsten, as well. But I do recall the Democratic Party, as Joe Manchin said, is fiscally conservative and socially compassionate. And that's exactly what he is demonstrating here in his frustration with the broad scope of the Build Back Better. He has been consistent in where he is on this package. And the fact that the Democrats are attacking him and questioning his character and saying he's been not truthful in this process, they're attacking him at his own peril, because he has been consistent on this. And I think the progressives and the way they're going about this, they're never going to get him to yes if they continue to attack his character.
We did have a Democrat on who made that very point. Dean Phillips made that point yesterday, doing so at their own peril. But sorry, Kirsten, before we go.
Oh, we don't have enough time to get into whether I don't think he's been consistent, and I think that I think some of his behavior, especially in the last couple of days, has really been a betrayal both to the president and to commitments that he made. And I don't think most of what's being said is an attack. I think it's a criticism, and I think that's part of public life, right? He's a big boy. He's a U.S. senator. And people are, these are serious issues, and these are serious issues that affect real people. And so this isn't about people disliking Joe Manchin. It's about people being concerned about Americans who need some help and some relief.
Kirsten Powers, Alice Stewart, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much to both of you. Happy holidays to both of you.
Happy holidays
You too,
to you.
Jim.